welcome to Dialogue. China is seeing a sharp decline in deaths and hospitalizations, as well as a downward trend of COVID-19 infections as we come out of the Chinese New Year holiday. Is China approaching herd immunity? How should we proceed to deal with possible new waves as we return to normal? And how are we doing in tracking the pandemic as new subvariants continue to emerge? To discuss these issues and more, I'm joined today by Dr. Shao Yiming, member of the Vaccine Task Force of the China State Council Joint Prevention and Control Mechanism, and also chief expert on AIDS at the Chinese Center for Disease Control and Prevention. That's our topic. I'm Xu Qinduo. Welcome to the discussion, Dr. Shao. If you look at China, nearly 3.5 billion COVID-19 vaccines doses have been administered on the Chinese mainland, with over 90% of the population fully vaccinated. And of course, with more people getting vaccinated and infected. So how close is China to building up its population immunity, let's say?
I mean, for the current, because this wave, we have many in China people got infected by the BA.5.2 and the BF.7. We have a strong immunity against this type of variants. But there another lineage is the BA.2.75 and the XBB, another lineage, which has not been spread in China. So we are discussing and how to develop our vaccine and to incorporate that type of variants and to make a good immunity against all variants. At the same time, continuous monitoring the virus variation.
Dr. Shao, there are different types of vaccines, probably 13 or 14, depends on how you count. Why we are having so many different types of vaccines here in China?
I think because at the beginning we do not know which technical platform can succeed, so we have to plan for more different technical platforms. We hope some of them will succeed. But this time, almost all technical platforms succeed. So that is a very good thing. And also, in the immunization history, we also found to deal with the very rapid changing mutation virus, one type of vaccine is not enough. Using different technology vaccine with a sequential immunization strategy, we can stimulate a better immunity. So when we have more vaccines, so we have this possibility of combining them to achieve better immunity against the virus.
Mm-hmm. How far are we moving in that direction? Given what we have talked about, actually this is a strength, let's say, almost advantage of the Chinese vaccines. With a variety of types of vaccines, you can combine them, at a different method and to increase immunity.
Yeah, currently, since the last autumn, the booster injection is already recommended using like the protein vaccine, viral vector vaccine, and also using not only intramuscular injection, but also using inhalation or nasal spray. So with the different vaccination route, we can stimulate not only the immunity in the body, but also in the mucosa, the virus entry point. So to not only protect the disease, but also we try to reach a certain level of protection against the infection.
Well, China has already launched several clinical trials of the homegrown candidate of vaccines based on the mRNA technology. Where are we now? How much progress are we making?
I think we have at least 5 companies mRNA vaccine already in clinical trial. At least 2 of them already conducted or completed the phase 3 trials. Those data has been delivered to the China Drug Administration, and they are analyzing those data. I think it should be not too long. We will get the final results.
Well, we mentioned about the XBB 1.5, and also there's the CH dot 1.1, the new variant, subvariant. How concerning are those variants? How contagious are they? Like, what kind of preparation we need to have probably at a national level and also individual level?
At the national level, I think because the current wave, the virus are the derived or the upstream variants of BA5, including the BA5.2, mostly in the southern part of China, and the BF7, which is the northern part of China. So they are all the lineage coming from BA5. The CH1 or XBB 1.5 you mentioned are coming from the BA2 lineage, their combinations. So that part is our major focus now. We should including those viral antigens into the multivalent vaccine components, and to fill the gap, the immunology gap of that lineage.
With that being said, Dr. Shao, of course, in an ideal situation, we will have a pan-coronavirus vaccine that will last a lifetime. How likely is that?
That is an ideal goal. It's like a dream. We have that dream to build a vaccine because the HIV is the virus called AIDS is the most changeable virus. It changes at least 10 times faster than coronavirus. And flu, which is also maybe 2 or 3 times faster than coronavirus. We all want to build a pan-flu or pan-AIDS virus, but so far we have not yet succeeded. But we have to keep our dreams, but working hard on bench. And the good thing is that the data we accumulated is much more than either flu or HIV. Like HIV, in the last about 4 decades, we have sequenced about 1 million. For coronavirus, within 3 years, we have already over 10 million sequence data. So using the AI, using the modern technology, we will build the better pan-coronavirus vaccine. But everything has to go step by step. As I mentioned, we first go with the multivariant vaccines, using different major variants, put them into one vaccine. Like we go with the flu, seasonal flu. We have 4 antigens, 4 different variants into the vaccine. And that already achieved. We have approved the first bivalent vaccine already. Quadrivalent vaccine, I predict will be approved in the near future. There will be more vaccines like that. And then we gradually go to the SARS-CoV-2 vaccine and then pan-coronavirus vaccine.
Seems that's the direction. I mean, encouraging direction. Dr. Shao, you here in China, 90% or 80% of the population got infected in December or early January, possibly. But anyway, the first wave has ended. But then, people are thinking of vaccination or booster vaccination or the second booster vaccination. How long do we need to have another vaccination?
I think the booster vaccination usually lasts 6 months, and natural infection, the immunity induced by natural infection is usually lasts longer. So we have a window of time to build better vaccines, but we don't want to take risk. So for the vulnerable population, including the older people and people with immunocompromised or underlying conditions, they will usually get a booster vaccination in 6 months' time, usually. So WHO recommended that. And also medical personnel, doctors and nurses, public health professionals who fighting on the front line of this pandemic, they should also be get a more frequent boost. The general population, especially the young adult, will not be so urgent for booster vaccination.
Well, Dr. Shao, as we have lifted all the restrictions and also probably the testing previously practiced, and now, so how are we tracking the new, probably new variant or variant from other parts of the world? Because we have people-to-people exchange more frequently after the reopening. So what's the plan, to continue to track the probably subvariant or new variant so we can deal with that?
Yeah, since we started the downgrade the COVID-19 from Class A management to Class B management, we are mainly rely on the surveillance site we set up formally for influenza virus. So we have several hundred sentinel sites. We could also expanded them to certain level to do the take samples, sequence the virus together with influenza virus. So we analyze the data regularly and publish them and deliver to the global database shared with other countries. So that is the main work we rely on, like all Class B disease management. So in that case, we can pick up if there in the future certain special variants appeared, we can quickly identify them. This work actually should be done not only at the genotype and the sequence level, but also the phenotype to see if their pathogenesis increase or stable. If there's all things are all normal, no major changes, we can keep on such a management level, continue. If anything danger we found, we will change the management level to upgrade.
That's all for the first part of our program. Coming up next is my previous interview with the Nobel laureate, Michael Spence. We'll be back right after this. Hello, Professor. In the recent online seminar, you said I quote here, we are entering an era of geopolitical tensions and fragmentation. So World Economic Forum founder Klaus Schwab called for reinforced cooperation to address the erosion of trust. Again, politics here. First, what would you describe as the core factors of this fragmentation, for example?
Well, it really has two parts. For most of the last 30 or 40 years, we've had a really wonderful run in the global economy. China grew, other emerging economies grew. This created deflationary pressures. We didn't really have to worry too much about inflation, and all that sort of thing. Now we have what I call a shock-prone world. These shocks are coming from all over the place, from increased severity and frequency of climate shocks. We had the war in the Ukraine. We have big energy transitions to deal with. If we're going to, effectively manage the sustainability agenda, and we have the geopolitical tensions. Some of these overlap with each other, but the result of that is two things. One of them is, the agenda, the construction of kind of global trade and supply chains, which used to be based entirely on efficiency and comparative advantage grounds, is going to experience a pattern of diversification. And diversification may be the right thing to do in a shock-prone environment. Companies and countries are going to start moving in this direction, but it's expensive, right? And so we're going to see a different architecture, of global supply chains, and it won't help with the supply constrained condition that we're in now. And then when you overlay the geopolitical tensions, I mean, the United States and China are in some kind of strategic competition. My personal view is that doesn't have to be particularly destructive. But there are destructive forms of it when either side tries to hold the other one back by denying access either to technology or to critical goods and so on. And so if we go down that road, then we're going to create an environment in which we do actually have a much more complicated and inefficient global economy. And if you look at it from the point of view of multinational companies, if we don't cooperate on sort of things like standards and handling data and a whole range of things, then they're going to find themselves operating in jurisdictions with inconsistent and even conflicting rules. So that's the kind of fragmentation that I think we possibly could face, and it's one of the reasons why I think Klaus Schwab and many others are emphasizing the importance of reestablishing dialogue with the purpose of finding ways to cooperate and avoiding, to the extent possible, this kind of destructive, nationalistic, competitive approach to international interdependence.
And of course, for global economy, there are also other factors. You mentioned in the recent interview that many people in the financial industry have never experienced inflation in their lifetime. Tell us more about that. How does that kind of attitudes may affect the economic performance or their decision making?
Well, I think in this area there's a major change. I mean, as I said before, we've lived in a period of essentially deflationary forces that are in large part a result of the successful growth of China and a wide range of emerging economies. This has just brought huge amounts of productive capacity to the global economy that wasn't there before, which meant that, whenever we had a sort of an increase in demand, we had a surge in supply. But, that can't go on forever. There isn't an infinite supply of unused productive capacity in the global economy. And when you add to that, aging, I mean, all of the developed world is aging. China is aging now. Japan is aging. You've got over 75% of the global economy that's experiencing reduced productive capacity. You've got the cost increases associated with the diversification that I referred to before. This is a very, very different world. This is a world where, central banks cannot pump liquidity into the system and expect to get away with it without significant inflationary pressures. And so what I was saying in that brief comment is that, in the financial system, even in policy making circles, and certainly in business, you've got a whole younger generation of people who never lived in a world that had this kind of supply constrained, inflationary prone environment. And you need a different mindset to operate in that environment. You even need different, sort of accounting systems. I mean, I have friends who say, have companies that have been built in the last 25 years who say their accounting systems aren't set up to handle inflationary pressures and what happens to inventories and so on, in an inflationary environment. So it's a big adjustment. I think we'll make it, but there'll be some missteps along the way as people sort of learn that we're living in a really, architecturally very different world with respect to the relationship between supply and demand. Mm. And, for example, not only have we used a lot of the unused productive capacity, but we have, as you well know, in China, hundreds of millions of new middle-class consumers. So the demand side of the global economy is exploded, and that's all good, but it's a different world.
Well, the IMF has warned that a third of the global economy is likely to fall into recession in this year. Do you believe that? What are the resulting global economic ripple effects if such a prediction turns out to be true?
Yeah, so I think it's quite possible that they're right about this, and they're very knowledgeable, and they have their fingers on the pulse of what's going on in a wide range of countries. But, so I mean, the problem really is the shocks that we were referred to before. So we had the pandemic shock. Many of these countries did not get vaccines till very late in the game. Their fiscal situations deteriorated very quickly, because of the need to try to live through the pandemic. Trade fell off. Then you have the war in Ukraine. Rising energy and food prices are producing distress and even famine in a number of these countries. You have the climate shocks coming at them. And now with the tightening monetary policy, you have growing signs of financial and fiscal distress in these countries. And most people, knowledgeable people, say there's going to probably have to be a fair amount of debt restructuring in these economies. So if I had to summarize that, I would say a subset of the global economy is facing something that looks like a perfect storm. And it's very difficult to see how, without a massive amount of help, and even then, you could avoid a kind of recessionary thing. So I think that's an important part of what the global economy is saying, and trying to mitigate all of the combined effect of all of that on these countries should be part of the international agenda. I hope it is, but I think there's a real possibility. I mean, there is no question that these countries are in for a very, very difficult, near-term future.
Well, if there's anything we can do to reverse that trend, or you seem quite pessimistic about 2023.
I am in part because the inflation fight is not going to stop. We're not going to take away the rising value of the major currencies like the dollar. That's just plain producing financial distress in a lot of places, especially places that have, dollar or hard currency denominated debt. I mean, it just gets bigger, if their currencies devalue. And, but again, if financial institutions with big balance sheets or bigger balance sheets than they have could do a fair amount to kind of mitigate this shock. And there's a kind of global discussion of doing a better job of debt restructuring than we have. The problem in that area is you not only have the public sector folks involved and the central banks, but you've got a whole bunch of private sector investors. You've got a transparency problem. A lot of the times you don't even know who these investors really are, and so on. So it's to use a technical term, a bit of a mess. And so it's difficult to deal with, but it's worth the effort that's going into it to try to make these processes smoother and more beneficial to the countries involved.
In an article you wrote on climate action, you questioned, whether it is better, if it is better to cling to an unattainable target or revise that goal to something more feasible. I think the UN Climate Agency also basically agree with you. They say it is almost, no credible pathway to 1.5 degrees Celsius in place. Tell us more in that respect. What kind of new target we should have, probably?
Well, so the challenge, nobody wants to do anything that, demotivates people and says, well, we failed, so let's give up, right? We ought to do two things. We ought to be a little bit more transparent about, what the art of the possible is. And the second thing is, if we're going to miss 1.5 degrees, then we ought to have a significant fraction of the agenda focused on how we're going to adapt to the climate change that kind of really does come at us.
Mm-hmm. What do you think we need to do, on the public level, for example? Is there a lack of the awareness of the urgency to fight climate change, or on the government's level, the lack of action maybe?
Yeah, I think, 15 years ago, you and I probably would have agreed there was an awareness problem. I don't think there's an awareness problem anymore. Mm-hmm. I mean, you have to be, there's, climate deniers, but that's different than kind of awareness. And so I don't think that is the problem. The problem is it's very complicated. It's a multidimensional agenda, much of which is international. There's a distributional part, who should shoulder what fraction of the burden, and that's very, very difficult. We see that in all the climate, all these COP, the sequence of COP meetings. And so, I guess I'd mention one other factor, making this energy transition, which is what we're really talking about, energy efficiency and the greening of the energy mix, involves very large amounts of investment. They're not impossible to imagine. The estimates are $3.5 trillion a year. The global economy is $80 or $90 trillion. So that's not, nobody would say that's a ridiculously outrageous, impossible achievement, but it's a big increment. And we're living in a world, at least many of us are, of high sovereign debt ratios and rising interest rates. And I personally do not expect the real interest rates to fall back to where they were in the old days for the reasons we talked about before, the difference in the supply conditions in the global economy. That means it's going to be more expensive in declining fiscal spaces to generate the public sector part of that 3.5 trillion or whatever the right number is investment. So I think there are major challenges. It's the bottom line, coming from multiple dimensions. It's not an awareness problem. It's, how do we get it done?
Mm-hmm. Many thanks to Michael Spence, the Nobel laureate, for joining us. You can also find us on the CGTN app on YouTube. I'm Xu Qinduo. Thank you for being with us. See you next time.